Hello and welcome to Circle Passages and Higher Ground. We're here at TC Media Studios in Olympia, and as always, thank you so very much for the opportunity to be able to do this public access television, and for just an incredible crew that is behind the scenes. But if they weren't there, this would not be happening. And would like to introduce Dr. Heather Taylor Zimmerman, co-host and cohort.
Thanks, Buck. Good to be here.
Yes, yeah. Indeed. So we've been talking about this for today's show. It was Mother's Day weekend. Here we are, Saturday, actual Mother's Day tomorrow. And many, many times, different kinds of meetings talking about Mother Earth. So today we'll kind of weave through both of those, I guess, and kind of where we go.
Where we go, yeah. Yeah, well, we can go all over with that one, but I'll begin with something that I think most people know, but mother, mater, and matter have the same root. So that Mother Earth is so archetypal, and as we just had some data points come out. They're not data points. They're like living causal realities, but about climate change. So just that respecting Mother Earth and the reciprocity of our exchange, and how, there's been a disregard for the feminine. And so we're kind of coming full circle in Mother's Day, honoring the feminine, the archetypal mother, and matter in that fundamental sense.
And what seems a little sad with that is that, we designate days of Mother's Day. It's kind of like 365 days, at least for this calendar, and we get to throw in an extra one every night. But it's each day, isn't it, with mothers in honoring and respecting, as well as on this planet that we reside is honoring Mother Earth. And it doesn't seem like we've been really taking care of her very much for many, many years now.
Yeah, we're reaping that tragic harvest at this point, but the mother, I was contemplating this driving in, the identification, a lot of the cultures that we'll be talking about are earth-based. And so that rooting and the mother tree, I think, will weave into our narrative. But really remembering that we are not only a part of, but we are the earth. And, somehow we imagine we're separate, and it's like, that just doesn't work. We are literally made of that substance and one with the earth, and yet it's such a hard thing for us to wrap our heads around.
And that's such a quandary, and I know we've been talking about this too, is the natives, the naturals, those who are already here, the indigenous on this continent anyway. And we've known this for eons, it seems, but their approaches of respect and gratitude for Mother Earth. It's just incredible that we've talked about settlers coming over, and it's more kind of like, what can we take here? Not everybody, but it just seemed like for the most part. So a whole different way of approaching what this is, how precious the planet is, how precious Mother Earth is.
Yeah. In Rites of Passage, which of course is something we both love, and they don't even differentiate between indigenous and the feminine. So they'll look at a essentially patriarchal but male-based Western model, which is the colonial model, and then they'll have the feminine and indigenous model. And even in Restoring Kinship Worldview, which I have as one of our things here, they have a whole precept on the feminine. But it's returning to the feminine, again, matter, mater, mother, that matters, and that reevaluation of the feminine in that sense. And so part of it is us returning to this earth-based model, that we are one with the earth, and that feminine sense of we're even, the way I was imagining it as we come here today is, we are within the womb of the earth. We cannot leave. We are bounded by the earth. And so to really let that sink into our hearts and minds that we are inseparable from the planet. And I think, again, the Western mindset, that separation, sometimes they call it the heresy of separation. And I think that that's the root of our disconnect, obviously, is imagining we're separate. And separate, and not only that, but above. Imagining that we have jurisdiction over that which is actually so much bigger than we are.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that the planet it's a large circle and so many other aspects of everything in, I'd say again, indigenous, and that's not just this continent, it's worldwide, of how important circle is and coming around to many, many different kinds of things. That's just pretty awesome too. But again, embracing, respecting, and being grateful for what we're given. But like you said, kind of the Western approach seems to have been, how can we use this, to our advantage, as opposed to how can we live together, because we see this, whatever the heck it is, it's climate change, but icebergs, not icebergs, but glaciers melting and all the other stuff in the rise. And, fortunately, Mother Earth has been through a lot of different things before we showed up, and it's survived.
Yeah, the trick is our survival.
Yeah, well,
Because without depressing anyone, the new study shows that we had hoped to stay at 1.5, and we really hit that most of this year. So the new evidence is that, and it's something like 80% consensus of, not on climate change, which is like unanimous, but on these numbers, and it's really 2.5, and then younger scientists say 3. And so we're really working around our own sustainability. The Earth will survive. It's mammals who go first. And again, just this imagination we have that we imagine we're not mammals, Buck. And we are. And so
above that.
Above that, yeah. So there's still time. There's a homeostatic balance that the Earth mercifully orients to, but it's really us being in alignment with that, and it's our sustainability that is in jeopardy. And so that's, I'm going to bring up this, you're talking about circle sama.
Yeah.
Introspective bear that I got at the Longhouse, which we're going to see beautiful images of. And this is the archetypal symbol of the self as a whole, but also of the womb and the mother. And so it's an apt image to hold.
Wonderful. You can kind of see a story here for sure. And again, all embraced in, like you said, in the womb. Just thinking of somebody that I know who a month ago had, newborn. So, what this is like for the baby to, I've been in this real safe place and a lot of great stuff going on, and now I'm out here. That's got to be quite a shock.
Yeah, quite a shock. Yeah, but that reminds me, I do think that this is akin to a rebirth process that humanity is going through. And so Tolkien had that eucatastrophe, a catastrophe that changes. And Crisis has that turning point, change point. It's a decision that we make. So I'm reframing as a rebirth. But yeah, the circle, and then I do think we want to return to the mother. That's in a lot of myths. But we are, of course, already still one with the mother and with the circle of the earth that you were talking about. So part of this is a reframe. But I love this. We'll show the images of the Longhouse at some point.
Yes, they'll be coming up.
Yeah, this is from there. And so it's a cedar box lid. And then I've never seen anything quite like this, so it's obviously a mirror reflection. And the mother bear is certainly an image of the empowered feminine and the mother.
And I know the camera doesn't quite pick it up, but it's 3D as far as carving goes too.
Yeah.
So that is just incredible too. And then the colors are just beautiful, all of the colors actually.
Yeah.
But this shade of blue anyway, just wow, so comforting. And
And totem design, for people who don't know, is often red white, blue, and black, and it has, there's a story told in all of the imagery that I can't tell. But it was made by a native chieftain from this area, and I was telling you, I ran away too quickly. It was ending when I purchased this and talked to the man, and I presume Squaxin. So, and there are bear around here because I have their school. It's a little crazy.
In this past week, we've taken a couple of walks over to Evergreen State College and the Longhouse.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing that the whole concept again of, from what I understand, and I'm not quite sure how this was done, multiple longhouses, but basically I guess the tribe would live under the same roof. So different families all living together. That must have just been incredible. It still is. I mean, it still is something that goes on. And then kind of stepping back for a moment and thinking about Mother Earth, and for all of us who inhabit this, not just people, but the plants, all the other great things, and definitely the animals. But we're all living on this planet, and how can we figure out a better way to take care of the planet, just like hopefully taking care of the Longhouse. That must have been just a really interesting dynamic of everybody under the same roof.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that you brought in animals and plants. We are animals, we're mammals specifically, but you're reminding me of land acknowledgements are now the most common way to start. And so this is one of the tribal native art buildings, and in 1975 they started, and it was suggested, this is a newer building, but it was suggested that they needed an authentic place to host the native, not only arts, which came later, masters in teaching alternated between indigenous and Western perspectives. But the Longhouse, which was the original building, these are Maori, just mind-blowing, gorgeous carvings.
These carvings,
Yeah, and when Buck and I, when we were walking around, they had some examples that were still being carved, hadn't been stained, but I'm imagining we're going to go up on some of the other buildings, some of the art buildings perhaps. Inlaid shell.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just absolutely incredible, the artwork itself and the stories behind that. And to me, it's kind of like paintings and sculpting. How meticulous this is and how patient you need to be as you're completing this whole piece. It's the intricacies, just absolutely incredible.
Yeah. And again, the telling of a story. So, each of these blue lights has a face. The iconography and the totemic imagery is a story, but it's more than that, it's an identity. I think a Western mind can't even, maybe a Western mind and heart can get closer, but it's hard to even imagine into what this means from someone from the culture. But to look at this, and what I love about Evergreen is they have the masters in teaching alternating, but they have these native arts buildings. And to honor art, which is a more indigenous, feminine way of knowing, Peace and Serenity is this building's name, may it be so. But the values that they hold and that are held in these places that are themselves art, is an honoring of this indigenous wisdom and of the mother. And this is the Longhouse proper.
And I don't think we caught one of those shots, but one of the buildings, like 3 or 4 right around the same area, but where they were carving a totem, probably about, 6, 8 feet long, and how just awesome that whole process itself is. But that it's happening right now. It's not like this is something that took place a long time ago for totems. It's an ongoing aspect of the cultures, especially locally, right?
Yeah, And, you know, they have all these flags. I mean, we have so many living, resurgent cultures. And that's one of the things that I think we're particularly blessed in the Pacific Northwest is we are so present to, or at least we have the opportunity to be so present to the living, breathing rebirth of these cultures, which we tend to hold as historic. And it's like they're not fixed in the past. They are continuing, evolving, and we have the opportunity to learn from them. This is Thunderbird.
You were talking about the Pacific Rim. So in this area, in the Longhouse, this area where different culture, different tribes would come and actually meet here. So this area that we're in right here, Evergreen's not that far away from where we're sitting, but could you talk a little bit more about those get-togethers, if you would?
I haven't been in a long time, but so there's a coalition of tribes not from this region alone, but Pacific Rim, like Maori, like we're talking a pretty broad regional territory, and they would rotate hosting. And hosting, this is a house of welcome. So hosting has this whole cultural significance. And so I would go a couple of times when Evergreen was the host. And so I went back in the day, 35 years ago, to Evergreen. And they would host, and you could watch, essentially. And there would be cultural presentations, but also tribal discussions amongst all of these Pacific Rim tribes. And unfortunately, I haven't been in a long time, and I know you and I keep going there, and it's honestly hard to understand, like, when are things happening? You know, as an amazing resource as it is, it would be wonderful to get more information disseminated so more people could learn and participate. But that was an amazing thing, was to go and to watch. I know we have the canoe journeys that are associated with that. And so there's a lot that's culturally enriching around that I don't know. But I believe Evergreen and these Native Arts buildings, the Longhouse, the way they alternated masters in teaching is just beyond precedent setting, deserves a lot of kudos for what they're doing in what we should be doing and should have done from the beginning, which is honoring and reciprocity with indigenous peoples and Native Americans, urban American Indians. You know, there are different language that I need to keep abreast of that I haven't, Buck. But.
And all of this is right in the middle of the cedars, pines. I think it's the southern whole, actually, the national rainforest, but of a rainforest. And this piece in the foreground here, it's a stone that, as soon as I saw that for the first time the other day, but it's a carving. There's a lot of moss on there that's you can't quite tell with some of the carving, but immediately, as soon as I saw this, was being down in the Yucatan and the Maya with steles. These huge stone, as you were journeying from one city, one village to another, telling a story of, and that's what this person has done right here, is carved an image of, and I'm sure this preceded the building itself, like you said, probably 1975?
Well, that was when the Native Art Studies began. And the same woman who started that, Marie, I'm not going to, Hellerman maybe? But anyways, she was the same person who had the key insight that we should have a building that is in line with this teaching. You know, instead of having the teaching in the Western model buildings, we should have a place to honor it. And so that was the same impetus for this. And this, a couple of phases gave birth to this. And then the Native Arts buildings came later. Yeah.
Pretty amazing, that's for sure. And the property that your family has, the west end of Olympia, out toward it's Black Lake, beloved, you know, and again, kind of waterways and different tribes coming into, here's a place, neutral ground. I mean, that's an incredible story in itself. And again, all in this this general area right here. It's fascinating.
Yeah, hugely rich. When I went to some native protests, which was a couple of people I've synchronously woven in with were involved in the Longhouse. And two of them were the head's chief of Indian Bureau of Affairs for Washington State. And so when I started going to some native protests through Kyle Lucas was one of the people, I learned a lot. Like essentially there's another history, shock and awe, that has essentially been repressed, is not honored by the majority history. And I know when I went to the Squaxin Tribal Museum, they would give a history presentation to the children and then to the adults who could handle it. But so it was a major place where people would come together. And there were a lot of treaty breaches, there was a war, there's a lot of repressed, there was a massacre, there was a lot of repressed history. And when I went to the tribal protests, which were beautiful, they were on the steps of the Capitol building, but there was a pilgrimage of a couple from Tacoma that people walked.
Wow.
Going there, so it was in sacred rite and ritual with singing and dancing, a big table of food down at the base of the steps, and a lot of like lifting it up to the earth, a lot of what we might even conceive of from a Western perspective of celebration, but a positive within the negative. And it was very earth-based. It wasn't for ourselves. They were protesting the use of the port for not Standing Rock in this instance, though it is that. The port is for our military. I'd like to put that out there. The port has many focuses, but that's one of them. And so that's what they were protesting, was that the port's use for fossil fuels and for some different legislation that was going through. And so it was this, again, earth-based. It's the people of the land. And that's what, when you're talking about land acknowledgement and that mentioning plants and animals, it's the identification with not only the earth, but kinship with all of the living creatures of the earth as children of the earth. So it's a different model. And then it's here because, of course, it is embedded in nature. And that, couldn't be otherwise, probably, from that perspective.
Which makes so much sense, because this is Eld Inlet, kind of behind this in a sense. And
Yeah.
all the different, it was probably the same tribe, but different bands, I guess, kind of scattered around this part of the inlet, because where you live, Fry Cove, and Bud Bay and all those, kind of another end of the whole inlet itself. But just, again, really fascinating how this was home,
Yeah.
before obviously the buildings got here.
Yeah, and when we went to the dedication of the Squaxin Park, which again is so wonderful, from Priest Point Park, with the repressive re-education and taking children, to Squaxin, I was surprised. I presume this was Squaxin land because I think they indicated that they had 6 of the fingerlets of the sound, which would be a pretty expansive territory where Squaxin,
Yes.
at least at one point.
Yeah, that was fascinating, yeah.
Yeah.
And, there's a piece, too, of, we kind of talk about the resettlement part here, or the settlers coming in, it seems like one of the first things in celebrating is, so the Squaxin are doing the presentation of kind of accepting having the park under their name again, and but it was forgiveness and open to those who were oppressive coming in, because even the settlers apparently calling the Squaxin people the friendly people. So it's kind of like welcoming and come on in, and yet it seems like, again, that Western approach of So how can we get our hands on this stuff, and how can we use it to our benefit, to the point of, like you were just talking about, the Port of Olympia and what that has turned into, or part of it anyway. It's, wow.
Yeah, and the Port of Olympia has a huge territory, so they have a lot of parks and land. So, but I hadn't realized the relationship it had with the military. And so it is just one of those fundamental things, is relationship to land, relationship to mother, kinship, and really looking at that as an ethical value that you honor and you maintain right relationship. And if you don't maintain right relationship, the disconnect is what does us in. And again, that's where we are entrenched in a Western model, and yet we really need to return to begin again. The Salish Sea, the Puget Sound, the Port of Olympia, all of these things are inextricably intertwined in a way that is part of this kinship model. Mother Earth, the mother, in which in a land acknowledgement we are, kindred, literally family with beaver, and and so as much as possible and as fast as possible, if we can return to that, I think that is our way forward.
Because the clock is certainly ticking in more toward, it seems like, destruction, as opposed to nurturing and kind of rebirth, if you would, of even just, if nothing else, an attitude in the approach. And again, that was what was cool in talking about what we were going to talk about today, the indigenous in this area, really, and actually the First Nation peoples, of being respectful and being grateful that Mother Earth, Pachamama. So just a whole different perspective, it seems, to get around to that, or come back to that, or listen, for us to listen to kind of like what's taking place. And kind of sliding over to Mother's Day weekend, this is just an incredible painting. And when I'm doing this, it kind of reminds me, but for you to really talk more about this, if you would describe, but it seems like the southwest of this country, but it's the figures here, grandmother and Bambino, or the child, and yet everything else that you've done here. So how did what was, tell us about this, please.
Okay, no, I would love to, because Mother's Day brings up Grandmother's Day and kind of this matrilineal, intergenerational perspective. And so it's a grandmother with a baby, of course, and it was done I made a bunch of cards and things from it for the 13 grandmothers. And they were working, this was Hopi, they were working trying to get back some of the native rights. There is, as you said, this extraction model where a lot of reservations were kind of given, which is terribly ironic because they were taken. And then presumably given back in part, and then a resource would be found, and then there would be another removal. And there was a strategic, conscious attempt on the part of our government, recognizing that women and this kind of matriarchal governance of some of these tribes, that was an impediment to our land grab, essentially. And so there was a strategic disempowerment of the feminine that our government did with the tribal governments. And so part of this was to honor these grandmothers. The 13 Grandmothers is a international organization, and they work for earth-based rights for children and elderly, that kind of 7-generation concept. And so this was a fundraiser. And it was really beautiful in terms of the positive. We are at 90 seconds in our doomsday clock, so it's a wake-up moment. And, we also have these living examples that we can return to. And so, like the Standing Rock, like so many different things, there are people willing to put their lives on the line. And so when I was doing this, people were going and they were living down there. They were protesting, they were standing, you know, in kinship and solidarity with Native people. And so that's one of the things to remember, is that there are all different ways to live our lives. And so the example, it was of Traditions, which is like a hub of all greatness in our area, I think. And they would have gatherings of what can we do? How can we support these women as they stand in solidarity, essentially to not have a mine and extraction fossil fuel industry. And so those are ongoing issues. Again, I mentioned the port here and some of the protests, but how can we stand in solidarity? You know, how can we be like these 13 grandmothers and essentially remember and honor the Mother Earth in all of these beautiful ways that we have as examples living amongst us.
And it's just mind-boggling. It's kind of like, well, how else can you put it? How else can it be kind of demonstrated, illustrated? Don't you get it? And it seems like we're still really struggling with that in so many ways.
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, we have a cumulative problem that we're facing, so it will take some austerity measures, which aren't hugely popular. Mm-hmm. But we have a beautiful example in all of the different, honestly, all of the different religions have, I grew up with live simply so others can simply live, and then we need to call ourselves into question. How are we honoring our mother in the sense of the Mother Earth? You know, how are we living in accordance with this kinship alignment and doing a land acknowledgement, which we've kind of circled around, but really, you know, what is the history of this land? Mm-hmm. Trying to make amends and be in right relationship with the land and the people of the land, and the people being, you know, deer people and beaver and whoever else, you know. That's a great place to start.
Definitely, and living in harmony with the animals and with the elements, the water. I mean, we're just, Pacific Northwest is just a real, incredible place for resources. So it's great to be here, and it's certainly to be out in these woods is always such a treat. Yeah. Walking the trails over by Eflot, going down to the water. And again, we're in rainforest. You know,
yeah.
It's just amazing that it's right here. And
you're going to bring in the mother tree. That's because the grandmother cedar and the mother tree, the Susan Simard's work, you know, is another way of imagining into a forest like a beehive is a socially altruistic organism. It's and I get to go to the bristlecone pines with my dad, over 6,000 years old. You know, how can we live to that ripe old age sustainably? You know, but so these mother tree, you know, they share resources in this way that's a socially altruistic organism, which is another way to imagine as we walk in these great forests, you know, how can we learn from not only brother and sister bear and orca, but from the trees and the wind.
And that was fascinating in her book, just a little piece of it, but of kind of how the trees, the plants really communicate with one another.
Yeah.
You know, we take so much for granted that this is really going on. And one aspect of it, I forget what it was, they put something into the roots of one of the trees, and then a nearby tree they were able to measure, and others too, where it got kind of the same message that was happening right here. So, unreal.
Humility, which comes from humus, the earth, you know, to be grounded, because they share resources like nutrients, but almost something akin to education and antidotes, immunity, you know, and I think we have a lot of the same possibility, you know, and potential if we remember that we're collective, if we remember that we're part of the earth, I think we can remember some of those other ways of being in kinship and community.
So one of our many challenges, but certainly, and hopefully it would be a daily challenge of, excuse me, just get out into nature, appreciate, be respectful, and just the gratitude that of the bounty that we have, again, in this area is just tremendous.
Yeah, and I think I have some friends who are doing befriending a tree practice, and they're having the most profound experiences. So, whether a tree is a cactus or whatever, getting out in nature and really sitting on the earth, grounding on the earth, connecting to the earth, and recognizing its sentience, that it is alive with an intelligence that honestly we should be humbled before.
Just pay attention, us, and kind of listen, see what's going on, but don't get caught up in our own stuff. There's a lot of learning to be had.
Yeah, and learning in a really different way. Some friends, examples from tree learning, these people, one person was imagining the question of what the forest looked like, well before, and they were given a vision of what it was like way back, and they checked it historically, and it was accurate. And people who, just had the most fascinating experiences, and we would look at a tree and would think of it as an inferior intelligence. And we really need to step away from that kind of hierarchical, in a bad sense or a negative, limiting sense, model of above, and really be, hylozoism is kind of the maternal aspect of being with, kinship, network, like what is it that we can learn from these different ways of being and knowing, and really pausing before we act.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, just, it was up here just a little bit ago, the Raven, and talking about transformation. There you go. Yeah. And then healing, if you want to hold it up to the camera back there.
Should I open it?
Sure. So to get these things, this is so incredible too. All that you need, you already possess.
Yeah.
So and it's those three things at the beginning of transformation, for us to make this transformation, which is going to be a healing process for Mother Earth, who is taking care of us. So we all benefit. One of those wonderful win-win situations. And I always like the magic part of this too, and then not the hocus pocus necessarily, but that works too. But just the magic of all of this taking place, and to discover that magic. How can we get there? Yeah. Here it is.
Yeah, and that magic shares a root with imagination. But I think that we are so accustomed to knowledge as discrete and finite and separative, as kind of left hemisphere, which is the masculine lobe, where it's like dissects. Sometimes they say the mind is the slayer of the real. And the right hemisphere is about remembering, putting the dismembered pieces together, which brings it to life, holistic, imagistic, and that it really is magical in the sense that we've forgotten it, but it is natural to us. We just have to remember.
Sounds good to me.
Sign us all up.
Yes, for sure. Well, how about if we wrap up for today? But thank you ever so much for sharing.
Oh, as always, thank you, Beck. Yeah, happy Mother's Day to the Earth.
Yes. And to all the moms globally, for sure. They're stepping up all the time, every day, every moment, to nurture, take care of us.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Yes. Well, thank you for tuning in, and again, thank you to the crew, because we wouldn't be able to do this without you. So thank you ever so much, and have a great Mother's Day weekend.